The Human Curious. What if history took a different turn? Welcome to The Human Curious, where we explore the fascinating what-ifs of history. We've all heard the stories, the facts, the undeniable truths, but what if one tiny detail changed everything? What if the past wasn't quite as it seemed, or a decision went a different way? Today, we're diving into some of history's most pivotal moments and twisting them with a single question: what if? 1. What if Benjamin Franklin hadn't embraced cold air? Benjamin Franklin believed cold air was good for health. He'd open his windows and sit naked for an hour each morning, thinking it prevented illness. Science agrees airflow helps, but the nudity? That was just Ben being Ben. But what if Franklin, a man of science and pragmatism, had taken a more conventional approach to health? Would he have discovered other forms of personal hygiene or preventative medicine that were even more groundbreaking? What if his insistence on air baths led to a widespread health fad that, while peculiar, inadvertently reduced the spread of airborne diseases in early America? Would his reputation as an eccentric genius be even more cemented, or perhaps overshadowed by a string of bizarre but effective health rituals? 1. Did you know the first computer bug was an actual bug? In 1947, engineers working on Harvard's Mark II computer found the cause of a malfunction: a moth stuck in the relay. They taped it in their logbook and wrote, "First actual case of bug being found." The word bug had existed in engineering for decades, but this was the first time the problem was literally a bug. What if that moth had never been found? If the engineers had simply assumed a wiring fault or a component failure, endlessly troubleshooting a phantom electrical issue, would the term computer bug have evolved differently, perhaps staying purely metaphorical? Or would the mystery of the recurring malfunction have delayed early computer development, perhaps pushing back the digital revolution by years, maybe even decades, simply because of one tiny insect? 1. Ketchup was sold as medicine in the 1830s. Dr. John Cook Bennett added tomatoes to ketchup and sold it as a cure for diarrhea, indigestion, and more. He even made ketchup pills. It worked as a laxative, but most cures were just marketing. Still, people ate it up. What if Dr. Bennett's ketchup pills had truly been a miracle cure? Imagine a world where pharmaceutical companies today market Ketchup X for all your digestive woes. Would we be dipping our fries in a potent medicinal condiment, perhaps with different flavors indicating different ailments? Would the ketchup as medicine industry have blossomed, perhaps even creating a global health empire with doctors prescribing specific brands of ketchup for various conditions? Our fast food experience would be wildly different. 1. Ancient toothpaste was surprisingly effective. The Egyptians used crushed eggshells, powdered ox hooves, and ash to clean their teeth. One recipe from 4 AD even included rock salt and iris flowers. Sounds horrible, but studies show some of these ancient concoctions actually worked. What if these ancient concoctions hadn't worked? Imagine a world where dental hygiene was virtually non-existent for millennia. How would human lifespans have been affected by widespread severe dental infections? Would different evolutionary pressures have led to humans developing stronger, more resilient teeth, or perhaps a completely different diet? Our smiles, and certainly our health, would look very different today. 1. The dancing plague of 1518 was real. In Strasbourg, Alsace, a woman named Frau Trophea started dancing uncontrollably in the street. Others joined her. Within a month, 400 people were dancing non-stop. Authorities banned music, but it didn't help. After 2 months, it stopped. No cause was ever found. Mass hysteria, maybe? What if the dancing plague of 1518 hadn't stopped after 2 months? What if it had spread beyond Strasbourg, infecting entire regions, countries, or even continents with an uncontrollable urge to dance? Would governments have collapsed under the weight of an unceasing, inexplicable epidemic? Would new forms of dance therapy or anti-dance measures have been invented, forever altering our understanding of public health and mass psychology? It's a terrifying thought to imagine the world pirouetting into chaos. 1. Contrary to popular belief, pirates were surprisingly democratic. Pirate ships weren't dictatorships. Captains were elected and could be voted out at any time. Loot was shared equally, and pirates created a fund to support injured crewmates. So piracy offered better benefits and more freedom than life in the Navy. What if pirate ships were dictatorships ruled by tyrannical captains with absolute power? Would the allure of piracy have diminished significantly, leading to fewer rogue adventurers on the high seas? Perhaps powerful pirate fleets, once united by democratic principles, would have been torn apart by internal strife and betrayals, making them easier targets for navies. Would the romanticized image of the swashbuckling pirate be replaced by one of brutal servitude, And would the golden age of piracy have been much shorter and bloodier? 1. Vlad the Impaler, the man who inspired Dracula, was known for skewering thousands. Yet in Romania he's seen as a hero. He fought off the Ottomans, united the land, and ruled with ruthless efficiency. His cruelty was legendary, but so was his leadership. What if Vlad the Impaler had failed to fight off the Ottomans? If his ruthless efficiency had not led to unification, but instead to internal rebellion and collapse? Would Romania's history be dramatically different, perhaps never fully forming as a distinct nation? And how would the legend of Dracula have evolved without his historical hero counterpart? Would he remain a purely fictional monster, or would another historical figure have inspired a tale of terror? 1. Ancient pregnancy tests actually worked. In 1350 BC, Egyptians told women to urinate on wheat and barley seeds. If the seeds sprouted, she was pregnant. Studies show this method had up to 85% accuracy. The Greeks had a different method involving onions, which let's just say didn't age well. What if all ancient pregnancy tests were completely unreliable, never yielding accurate results? How would this uncertainty have impacted family planning, social structures, and even the role of women in ancient societies? Would superstitions and divine interpretations have played an even larger role in determining potential pregnancies, leading to vastly different cultural norms around childbirth and lineage? 1. The first online sale was weed. In 1971, Stanford students used ARPANET to arrange a cannabis deal with MIT students. The payment was in person, but the order was placed online. Forget eBay. The internet's first product was pot. What if the very first online transaction had been something utterly mundane, like a book, a calculator, or even a pizza? Would the early internet's trajectory have been perceived differently, perhaps as purely academic or commercial, rather than having this rebellious counterculture origin? Would the initial public perception of the internet have been more sterile, less intriguing, and would its rapid adoption have been slowed without this quirky, memorable beginning? 1. Nellie Bly went undercover in a mental asylum and exposed horrific conditions. Then she raced around the world in 72 days, beating the fictional record set by Phileas Fogg. She even met Jules Verne, the author of the novel that inspired her journey. What if Nellie Bly had never taken on the Around the World in 80 Days challenge? Would her legacy have been solely as a pioneering investigative journalist, or would her daring spirit have found another equally impactful outlet? Would the public's imagination have been captured in the same way, without her real-life adventure mirroring a popular fictional tale? Perhaps her influence on women in journalism would have been less profound, simply because she missed out on that one extraordinary, highly publicized feat. 1. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC. By then, the Great Pyramid of Giza was already over 2,000 years old. In fact, she lived closer to the Apollo 11 moon landing than to the pyramid's construction. Ancient Egypt was already ancient to the ancient Egyptians. Mind-blowing, right? What if Cleopatra had lived during the time the pyramids were being built, or just a few centuries after? How would her reign have been viewed, and what impact would it have had on the monumental projects of that era? Would her personal story, already intertwined with powerful empires, have been even more legendary, perhaps with her overseeing the construction of new wonders, rather than ruling an already ancient declining empire? 1. In 1233, Pope Gregory VII linked cats to Satan and ordered their extermination. The resulting cat purge let rats multiply unchecked. Those rats helped spread the Black Death. Sometimes a holy war has unholy consequences. What if Pope Gregory IX had not persecuted cats? Imagine a medieval Europe where cats were revered, or at least tolerated. Would the cat population have remained robust, keeping the rat population in check? Could this seemingly small decision have significantly mitigated the spread of the Black Death, saving millions of lives and fundamentally altering the demographic, economic, and social landscape of Europe for centuries to come? The course of Western civilization might have been entirely different. 1. Ancient Rome had female gladiators called gladiatrices. They were rare but real, and they fought wild animals or other women for the crowd's entertainment. The practice was outlawed in the 3rd century AD, but its legacy still slices through history. What if Roman society had never allowed female gladiators, seeing it as utterly improper or unthinkable? Would the notion of women in combat or public spectacle have been even more repressed in subsequent eras? Would we have lost an intriguing, albeit brutal example of female agency and entertainment in the ancient world, making our understanding of Roman social norms even less diverse? 1. The pirate queen Qing Shi commanded over 70,000 pirates and 1,200 ships in the South China Sea. When she surrendered in 1810, she negotiated full pardons and let her crew keep their loot. She retired rich, respected, and undefeated. What if Qing Shi, the formidable pirate queen, had been defeated and captured? Would her vast pirate confederation have dissolved into chaos? Or would another powerful figure have risen to take her place? How would the naval powers of the time have handled such a massive pirate force? And would her defeat have led to a more aggressive crackdown on piracy in the region, perhaps altering trade routes and colonial ambitions in Asia? Her incredible legacy of retirement, rich and undefeated, would have been lost to history. 1. Between 1912 and 1948, the Olympics awarded medals in architecture, sculpture, music, and literature. The only rule: the work had to be inspired by sports. Artists were later dropped for being professionals. What if the Olympics had never stopped awarding medals for art? Imagine the Summer Games today, where athletes compete on the track, and artists compete in galleries and concert halls. Would the Olympics be a grander, more holistic celebration of human achievement, physical and creative? Would it bridge the gap between sport and culture, perhaps even inspiring new art forms centered around athletic endeavor? The medal count would certainly be more diverse. 1. Not all civilizations used base 10 numbers. The Babylonians used base 60, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. Some Native American tribes counted in base 8 using only their fingers and ignoring their thumbs. Base 10 isn't the only way to count, just the one that's stuck. What if the entire world had adopted the Babylonian base 60 number system? Our entire mathematical framework, from basic arithmetic to advanced calculus, would be fundamentally different. How would our clocks, our currency, and even our computer code be structured? Would complex calculations be easier or harder? It's mind-boggling to imagine our everyday lives organized around a sexagesimal system instead of the decimal one we take for granted. 1. Abraham Lincoln stood 6'4" and was a county wrestling champ. He fought over 300 matches and lost only one. He used a style called catch-as-catch-can. In 1992, he was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. Plato was a wrestler too, one of the most influential philosophers of all time. Even before becoming a philosopher, he was a competitive wrestler. Interestingly, he was not actually named Plato at birth. His real name was Aristocles, but his coach nicknamed him Plato, meaning broad-shouldered. He even competed in the Isthmian Games. Muscles and metaphysics, what a combo. What if Abraham Lincoln had been a terrible wrestler, losing every match? Would his early reputation as a strong, capable man have been diminished? Would the tales of Honest Abe wrestling have simply never existed, altering a small but interesting part of his public persona before his presidency? And for Plato, what if his wrestling prowess had overshadowed his philosophical mind? Would he have remained Aristocles, forever known as a great athlete, never gaining the lasting fame as Plato, the broad-shouldered philosopher? 1. President Andrew Jackson's parrot named Paul had a filthy mouth. At Jackson's funeral, Paul started swearing so loudly and constantly that the parrot had to be removed. Nothing like a bird yelling obscenities at a funeral. What if Paul the parrot had been perfectly well-behaved at Andrew Jackson's funeral, perhaps even reciting a solemn eulogy? Would this quirky, memorable anecdote have been lost to history? Perhaps the story of Jackson's rough-and-tumble character would be slightly less colorful without this particular feathered companion contributing to the chaos even in death. 1. Emus defeated the Australian army. Quick icebreaker: if you could win a battle against any animal, which would it be? Drop your answer in the comments below. In 1932, farmers begged the government to stop massive flocks of crop-destroying emus. The military showed up with machine guns and thousands of rounds, but the emus scattered, regrouped, and outmaneuvered them. After a month of humiliation, the soldiers gave up. The emus won. No contest. What if the Australian army had decisively won the Emu War, perhaps through superior tactics or unexpected avian vulnerabilities? Would this obscure historical event be remembered as a decisive military victory, rather than a comedic footnote? And how might the ongoing human-wildlife conflict in Australia have evolved if the military had demonstrated such a clear dominance over its feathered foes? We might be living in a world where emus are a regulated pest, not a symbol of military humility. 1. Oxford University started teaching in 1096. The Aztec capital, Tenochtitlan, wasn't founded until 1325. So yes, Oxford is older than the entire Aztec Empire. Let that marinate for a second. What if Oxford University had been founded after the Aztec Empire? This simple shift in timeline would utterly scramble our perception of ancient and modern. Would the intellectual world of Europe feel less established in comparison to the grand, yet tragically brief empire in the Americas? It would certainly make that comparison a lot less mind-blowing, and perhaps force us to rethink our Eurocentric views of historical timelines. 1. After falling ill, Alexander was declared dead, but his body didn't decompose for 6 days. Some modern doctors think he had Guillain-Barré syndrome and was paralyzed, not dead. What if during those 6 days someone had realized Alexander the Great was merely paralyzed and not dead? Would he have recovered and continued his conquests? How would this have altered the succession crisis and the division of his vast empire? Would the Hellenistic world have been even larger and more unified, or would internal conflicts eventually consume a king who cheated death? The entire map of the ancient world might look drastically different. 1. St. Lawrence is famously remembered for his sharp wit. When asked to surrender the church's treasures, he instead presented Rome's poor and sick, calling them the true wealth of the church. When Roman officials grilled St. Lawrence over a fire, he reportedly quipped, "Turn me over, I'm done on this side." Because of this legendary line, he became the patron saint of both chefs and comedians. What if St. Lawrence had simply been silent or fearful during his torture, without his legendary wit? Would he still be remembered as a martyr, but perhaps without the unique, almost humorous angle that has made him the patron saint of chefs and comedians? Would his story be less impactful, less enduring, without that defiant and clever retort in the face of death? 1. Forget deserts. Millions of years ago, camels roamed the icy landscapes of North America. These towering beasts called camelops stood up to 2 feet taller than today's desert dwellers. They didn't need scorching heat, just tundra and snow. They went extinct 11,000 years ago, possibly thanks to humans, but the jury is still out. What if Arctic camels, camelops, had not gone extinct? Imagine a modern world where these massive furry camels still roam the Canadian tundra or Siberian plains. How would they impact modern ecosystems, and would they be a target for conservation efforts, or perhaps even domestication in colder climates? Our understanding of camels and the history of megafauna would be radically different if these giants still roamed the ice. 1. Lord Byron brought a bear to college. Trinity College didn't allow dogs, but it didn't say anything about bears. So, Lord Byron brought one. He walked it on a leash and joked that he'd have it apply for a fellowship. No one dared stop him. What if Trinity College had explicitly banned bears, or if someone had dared to stop Lord Byron? Would he have found another outlandish way to rebel against authority, or would his wild nature have been curbed earlier in his life? Perhaps his literary works would have been less eccentric, less challenging, if he hadn't been allowed such bizarre personal expressions during his formative years. The world might have lost some of its most famously flamboyant poet. 1. In the 1880s South Africa, railway worker James Wide lost both legs in an accident. So he trained a baboon named Jack to operate signal levers. After an investigation, officials were so impressed that they hired Jack. He earned wages and beer and never made a mistake in 9 years. What if Jack the baboon had failed at his job, making frequent mistakes or even causing an accident? Would the officials have been less impressed, leading to a much different outcome for James Wide's innovative solution? Perhaps the fascinating story of a baboon railway worker, a testament to interspecies collaboration and unique problem-solving, would never have been recorded in the annals of history. 1. Humans have existed for around 200,000 years, but written history only covers the last 6,000. That means 97% of our story is lost to time. We know almost nothing about what came before writing. Only scattered artifacts and cave art give us hints. What if humans had developed written language much earlier, perhaps 50,000 or 100,000 years ago? Imagine the vast libraries of knowledge we'd possess about the earliest anatomically modern humans, their societies, beliefs, and migrations. Would we have a clearer understanding of prehistoric events, perhaps even solving long-standing archaeological mysteries? Our perception of prehistory would simply cease to exist, replaced by an incredibly deep, written record of the human journey. 1. In medieval Europe, using a fork was borderline blasphemy. When a Byzantine princess used one at a Venetian banquet, the church called it sinful. God gave us fingers, they said. The fork eventually caught on, but not before centuries of resistance and superstition. What if the church's decree against forks had held and they remained considered the devil's tool indefinitely? Would we still be eating most of our food with our hands, or would other, less sinful utensils have evolved, perhaps elaborate spoon designs or specialized finger protectors? Fine dining, and indeed casual eating, would be a vastly different and perhaps much messier experience. 1. Hans Scharf, a German interrogator during World War II, never tortured prisoners. Instead, he fed them, cracked jokes, and took them on walks without guards. His friendly tactics earned their trust, and they shared intel willingly. His methods were so effective, the United States brought him in to train their own. What if Hans Scharf had used conventional brutal interrogation methods? Would he have obtained less reliable intelligence, or perhaps none at all, from his prisoners? His revolutionary friendly approach proved highly effective, demonstrating the power of trust over coercion. Without his example, would military interrogators across the world have continued to rely on torture for much longer, missing a crucial lesson in human psychology and intelligence gathering? 1. In 1816, 11-year-old Mary Sawyer brought her pet lamb to school. It followed her there, bleated in class, and became the subject of a poem by a classmate. Later, a writer added more verses, and the nursery rhyme was born, straight from a true story. What if Mary Sawyer's lamb had simply stayed home that day? Or if the classmate hadn't been inspired to write a poem? Would the beloved nursery rhyme, "Mary had a little lamb," simply never have existed? It's a small what if, but it shows how a tiny, charming moment can spark a piece of culture that endures for centuries. 1. The French Revolution sparked the metric system. Tired of confusing and inconsistent measurements, the French revolutionaries introduced the metric system in 1795. It was designed to be logical, universal, and based on natural constants like the Earth's meridian. Before this, France had over 250,000 different units of measure. The metric system was their way of bringing order to chaos, and it stuck. Today, almost the entire world uses it. What if the metric system had failed to catch on, remaining a niche idea or a system only used in France? Imagine a world still grappling with thousands of inconsistent units of measure across the globe. International trade, scientific collaboration, and even simple everyday tasks would be infinitely more complicated, filled with endless conversions and misunderstandings. We'd still be in measurement chaos. 1. Before becoming Pope Pius II, Aeneas Piccolomini wrote The Tale of Two Lovers, a steamy romance novel. It was filled with passionate letters and erotic scenes. The twist, it became a bestseller, and so did he, just in a completely different line of work. What if Aeneas Piccolomini had never written The Tale of Two Lovers? Would his path to the papacy have been less interesting, less controversial? Perhaps he would have been seen as a more traditional, less intriguing figure. Or, conversely, what if the novel had been a flop, or discovered later and caused a scandal that prevented his rise? It's a delightful thought to consider a pope with such a scandalous literary past. 1. Thomas Edison accidentally created Hollywood. In the early 1900s, filmmakers fled New Jersey to escape Thomas Edison's lawsuits. He owned patents on nearly all movie-making equipment. They headed west to Los Angeles, where courts were less friendly to Edison and the weather was perfect for filming. So, Hollywood was born out of copyright evasion. What if Thomas Edison, instead of aggressively suing filmmakers, had embraced them, perhaps creating a powerful film monopoly on the East Coast? Would Hollywood, as we know it, have never existed? Would the global film industry have been centered in New Jersey or New York? Perhaps with a completely different aesthetic and cultural influence, the entire landscape of global entertainment might look vastly different. Hey, curious minds, quick pause. Which of these facts would you not want to be true in your timeline? Let us know in the comments. Or better yet, what's your favorite what-if moment in history? Now back to the madness. Napoleon accidentally created the modern canned food industry. In 1795, Napoleon Bonaparte offered a cash prize to anyone who could invent a better way to preserve food for his armies. A French chef, Nicolas Appert, answered the call by sealing food in glass jars and heating them. It worked so well that armies marched farther and faster. Later, canned food evolved into metal tins, feeding explorers, soldiers, and eventually grocery stores. So, your canned beans exist thanks to Napoleon's hunger for conquest.
33. What if Napoleon had not offered that prize for food preservation? Or what if Nicolas Appert had failed to invent canning? Would armies have continued to be plagued by food spoilage, severely limiting their range and effectiveness? Our modern grocery stores would certainly look very different, with a fundamental food preservation method missing from our shelves.
Did you know that Julius Caesar invented the modern calendar? Sick of the Roman calendar constantly falling out of sync with the seasons, Julius Caesar ordered a total overhaul in 46 BCE. His new Julian calendar introduced the 365-day year and leap years. It ruled Western civilization for over 1,600 years. Its bones still shape your calendar today.
34. What if Julius Caesar had not reformed the calendar? Imagine a world where our days, months, and seasons were constantly out of sync. How would this chaos have impacted agriculture, religious festivals, and historical record-keeping?
The world's shortest war lasted 38 minutes. In 1896, the British issued an ultimatum to the Sultan of Zanzibar. He refused to step down. Britain opened fire at 9:02 a.m. and by 9:40 it was over. The Sultan fled, so the entire war lasted less than an episode of your favorite sitcom.
35. What if the Anglo-Zanzibar War had lasted longer, perhaps days, weeks, or even months? Would it have escalated into a wider colonial conflict, drawing in other powers?
Roman Emperor Caligula loved his racehorse Incitatus so much that he allegedly planned to make him a consul. Incitatus lived like royalty with 18 servants, a marble stable, jeweled harnesses, and oats mixed with gold flakes. Caligula joked, or maybe didn't, that he'd make Incitatus a Roman consul. Some sources even claim he was made a priest. But historians today believe these stories were political hit jobs, exaggerated to paint Caligula as dangerously insane.
36. What if Caligula had actually succeeded in making Incitatus a Roman consul, and it wasn't just a political exaggeration? How would the Roman Senate have reacted to a horse in such a high office? Would it have fundamentally changed the nature of Roman politics, perhaps setting a bizarre precedent for animal leadership in the empire?
According to Cuban intelligence, Fidel Castro survived more than 634 attempts on his life, from poisoned cigars, exploding seashells to sniper plots, but none succeeded. He once joked, "If surviving assassination attempts were an Olympic sport, I'd win gold."
37. What if one of those 634 assassination attempts on Fidel Castro's life had succeeded? How would the Cuban Revolution have unfolded? Would the US-Cuba relationship have normalized much earlier? Or would another, perhaps more hardline leader have taken power, leading to even greater tensions? The Cold War dynamics in the Americas, and indeed global politics, would have been drastically different without Castro's decades-long leadership.
When London burned in 1666, destroying over 13,000 homes, it was financial chaos. No one had insurance. In the aftermath, a man named Nicholas Barbin stepped in, selling the first fire insurance policies to panicked citizens. Out of the ashes of disaster, the modern insurance industry was born.
38. What if Nicholas Barbin had not stepped in after the Great Fire of London, and the concept of fire insurance had not emerged? Would subsequent urban disasters have led to even more widespread financial ruin and social instability? Would the concept of risk management and collective security have evolved much slower, with massive economic consequences for centuries? The Great Fire's devastation might have been even more catastrophic in the long run.
Religion might be older than farming. For years we thought agriculture came first, then temples, but Göbekli Tepe, built around 9,500 BC, predates farming in that region. It's a massive spiritual site constructed by hunter-gatherers. Worship may have inspired civilization, not the other way around.
39. What if farming had unequivocally come before organized religion, as was long believed? How would human societal development have differed if the need for sustenance and settlement was the primary driver of complexity, with spirituality emerging only later? The discovery of Göbekli Tepe challenges this, suggesting a world where shared beliefs and monumental worship might have been the catalyst for people to settle down and eventually farm. Without that initial spiritual spark, perhaps civilization itself would have taken a very different path.
In 1954, Ernest Hemingway's plane crashed in Uganda. He survived. The next day, his rescue plane exploded on takeoff. He survived that too by headbutting the door open. After 9 concussions, the man was more myth than mortal.
40. What if Ernest Hemingway hadn't survived those 2 plane crashes in 24 hours? The literary world would have lost a giant decades earlier. What great works would have remained unwritten? Would his legend as a rugged adventurer have been less pronounced, or replaced by a tragic end? His life, already epic, would have ended far too soon, and our literary landscape would be poorer for it.
In 897 AD, Pope Stephen VI exhumed his predecessor, Pope Formosus, dressed the corpse in robes, and put him on trial. The dead pope lost, had his fingers chopped off, and was dumped in the river. It was called the Cadaver Synod. Church politics were wild.
A 41. What if the Cadaver Synod had never happened? Or if Pope Stephen VI had chosen a less grotesque form of political revenge? This bizarre and shocking event is a testament to the extreme depths of medieval church politics. Without it, perhaps the subsequent history of the papacy would have been less fraught with such public displays of power and humiliation, leading to a slightly less wild and more stable period for the church.
In the early 1900s, the Champawat tiger terrorized villages across Nepal and India, claiming 436 lives over the span of nearly a decade. Deforestation had destroyed its natural habitat and food sources, driving the tiger to hunt humans out of desperation. For years, no one could stop it. Finally, in 1907, legendary hunter Jim Corbett tracked and killed the tiger, ending one of the deadliest reigns of terror in history.
42. What if Jim Corbett had failed to track and kill the Champawat tiger? Would its reign of terror have continued for even longer, claiming more lives and spreading even deeper fear across the region? Would the legend of the man-eater have grown even more terrifying, perhaps leading to mass evacuations of villages, or even larger-scale military interventions? The end of that particular nightmare hinged on one legendary hunter.
John Tyler, the 10th U.S. president, was born in 1790. He had a son at 63, and that son had a child at 75. As of now, Tyler's grandson is still alive. 3 generations spanning over 230 years.
43. What if John Tyler's family line had been less unusually stretched across time? Or if his last grandson had not lived so long? This incredible, almost unbelievable fact about a direct link to a 1700s president would be lost. It's a living bridge to an incredibly distant past. Without it, we'd lose a tangible reminder of just how recent American history truly is, despite feeling so far removed.
Before faxes became retro, they were revolutionary. The first fax machine dates back to 1843, thanks to Alexander Bain. That's the same year settlers began crossing the Oregon Trail. Pioneers were in wagons, and Scotland was already sending documents electronically.
44. What if the fax machine had been invented much later? Perhaps even after the telephone or radio had become widespread? Would the concept of electronic document transmission have felt less revolutionary, overshadowed by other communication technologies? Perhaps the immediate need for such a device in the mid-19th century was crucial for its early adoption and development, paving the way for later digital communication.
The world's oldest complaint letter is almost 4,000 years old. In 1750 BC, over 3,700 years ago, a man named Nani filed the world's first known customer complaint. On a clay tablet in ancient Mesopotamia, he angrily accused a merchant, Anasar, of selling him low-quality copper and treating his messenger poorly. Nani demanded either a refund or better copper. This oldest written customer complaint, a Guinness World Record holder, is proof that even in 1750 BCE, customers were already asking to speak to the manager.
45. What if Nani's complaint letter had never been written, or if it had been lost to time? We would lack this incredible, relatable glimpse into daily life and commerce in ancient Mesopotamia. It's a human touchstone that reminds us that some aspects of human interaction, like customer service complaints, are truly timeless. Without it, our understanding of ancient commercial grievances would be less vivid.
Sleep deprivation causes catastrophes. Chernobyl, the Challenger explosion, and the Exxon Valdez oil spill all involved sleep-deprived decision-makers. Fatigue impairs judgment worse than alcohol. Yet nearly a third of adults get under 6 hours of sleep at night. That nap might actually save humanity.
46. What if sleep deprivation's role in major catastrophes had never been identified or understood? Would we still be living in a world where the dangers of fatigue are severely underestimated in high-stakes professions? Would there be even more preventable disasters? And would our understanding of human error and safety protocols be far less advanced? It's a sobering thought to consider a world where we never learned this critical lesson.
In 1807, Napoleon planned a celebratory rabbit hunt. Thousands of bunnies were released, but instead of fleeing, they charged. These were tame rabbits raised by farmers. They thought Napoleon was there to feed them. He retreated, overrun by a fuzzy stampede.
47. What if Napoleon's rabbit hunt had gone perfectly as planned, with the rabbits scattering in fear and his army enjoying a successful, glorious hunt? This hilarious and humbling anecdote, showcasing a lighter side of the famously serious emperor, would be lost to history. It's a reminder that even the greatest conquerors can be outmaneuvered by an army of fluffy, hungry bunnies.
The first museum curator was a princess. In 530 BC, Princess Enigaldi Nana of Babylon ran a museum with artifacts labeled in 3 languages. Some items dated back 1,500 years. Even then, her father, King Nabonidus, was the world's first archaeologist. So technically, history had a museum before it even had history books.
48. What if the first museum curator had been a man? Or if Princess Enigaldi Nana's work had gone unrecorded? We would lose this remarkable example of an ancient female scholar and curator, challenging our preconceived notions of historical roles. Her existence as the earliest known museum curator is a powerful testament to the intellectual contributions of women in the ancient world.
During Soviet times, Genghis Khan's name was erased from textbooks, monuments, and maps. He was too nationalistic for Soviet ideology. It wasn't until the USSR collapsed that Mongolia could openly honor its greatest and most feared leader again.
49. What if Genghis Khan's name had remained officially erased and suppressed, even after the fall of the Soviet Union, perhaps due to lingering political sensitivities? How would that have impacted Mongolian national identity and historical memory? Would the world have a less complete understanding of one of history's most impactful figures, simply because his own people were prevented from celebrating his legacy?
Ancient perfume was solid cones. Forget fancy sprays. Ancient Egyptians rocked perfume cones made from myrrh, frankincense, and other aromatic goodies. They'd perch these solid cones on their heads, letting them slowly melt under the sun, releasing a steady cloud of fragrance all day. The original long-lasting scent hack.
50. What if ancient Egyptians had invented perfume sprays instead of solid cones? Would our modern perfumery have a different origin, perhaps focusing on volatile liquids much earlier? The image of an Egyptian noble with a melting perfume cone on their head is so iconic. Without it, we'd lose a wonderfully peculiar detail about ancient fashion and hygiene.
We're halfway through our journey into the what-ifs of history. So which what-if so far has surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Romans used public toilets for chats. Roman public toilets were literal social hubs. Rows of bench holes side by side meant you were never alone for your business. Politics, gossip, business deals, all discussed mid-squat. They even shared a communal sponge on a stick instead of toilet paper. Hygiene not exactly their strong suit.
51. What if Roman society had emphasized private rather than communal toilets? Would the social dynamics of ancient Rome have been different without these bustling restroom hubs? Perhaps less casual information exchange and networking would have occurred, subtly altering the flow of daily life and public discourse? And we certainly wouldn't have the amusing, if slightly disgusting, image of shared sponges.
Medieval animals went on trial. In medieval Europe, pigs, rats, and even insects could be dragged into court. Pigs were hanged for killing kids. Rats were excommunicated for spreading the plague. It sounds absurd now, but back then, animals were considered moral actors just like people. Justice was bizarrely universal.
52. What if medieval European legal systems had never put animals on trial? This bizarre practice offers a fascinating glimpse into the medieval worldview, where the line between human and animal culpability was blurred. Without these absurd trials, our understanding of medieval justice and their view of the natural world would be less eccentric and arguably less revealing of their unique mindset.
Vikings get painted as filthy, dirty, barbarian brutes, but archaeology tells a different story. They owned tweezers, combs, and even ear cleaners. Hot springs were their jam. They had a word for hair wash day. In truth, Vikings probably smelled way better than most medieval Europeans.
53. What if the popular image of filthy, unhygienic Vikings was entirely accurate? How would this affect our historical perception of them? Would they be seen as less advanced, more purely barbaric? This what if reminds us how a single historical misconception can shape centuries of popular belief. It's nice to know they were probably quite clean.
When you think Great Wall of China, you picture stone and mortar, right? Well, archaeologists discovered that Ancient builders mixed sticky rice with slaked lime to create a super strong binding agent. This rice glue was so durable that parts of the wall still stand even after centuries of battering by war and weather.
54. What if the ancient Chinese builders had not discovered the super strong properties of sticky rice mortar? Would the Great Wall have been less durable, requiring constant repairs, or perhaps even collapsing in many sections over time? It's a small ingredient, but its absence might have significantly altered the longevity and structural integrity of one of the world's most iconic wonders.
In the 1800s, rich Victorians threw parties where the main attraction was unwrapping a real Egyptian mummy. Guests would sip champagne while a doctor peeled back ancient bandages layer by layer. It was billed as science, but was basically gruesome showbiz for bored elites.
55. What if mummy unwrapping had never become a bizarre form of Victorian entertainment? Would the ethical treatment of ancient remains have developed much earlier, with less desecration of historical artifacts? Perhaps our modern understanding of archaeology would have evolved in a more respectful manner, without this macabre, sensationalized period in its history.
After Einstein died in 1955, the pathologist performing his autopsy decided to keep his brain without permission. He sliced it into pieces, hoping to find the secrets of genius. Instead, he kicked off one of science's weirdest ethical scandals. Pieces of Einstein's brain traveled in jars for decades.
56. What if Einstein's brain had been left undisturbed after his death, given a respectful burial without the illicit removal and dissection? Would the mystique surrounding his genius be less pronounced, or would it simply have shifted? This bizarre what-if highlights a strange, unethical chapter in scientific history, driven by an insatiable curiosity about the nature of brilliance.
From 1900 to 1920, tug-of-war was an official Olympic event. Teams grunted and strained to yank each other across a line for gold medals. It eventually got dropped for being too slow-paced and, frankly, a little too medieval for the modern games.
57. What if tug-of-war had never been dropped from the Olympics? Imagine it as a premier event today, with professional tug-of-war athletes training year-round. Would it garner massive viewership, or would it remain a quirky, niche sport? It's fun to picture Olympic commentators describing the intricate strategies of rope pulling on the world stage.
When Lady Liberty arrived in New York Harbor in 1886, she wasn't just symbolic, she was functional. For 16 years, her torch served as a working lighthouse, guiding ships into the port. The problem was, the light wasn't very bright. Great statue, but lousy lighthouse.
58. What if the Statue of Liberty's torch had been an incredibly powerful and effective lighthouse, perhaps becoming a crucial navigational aid for decades? Would its symbolic meaning have been diluted by its utilitarian function? Or would it have added another layer to its identity, both a beacon of freedom and a literal guide for mariners? The lousy lighthouse aspect is part of its charm. A perfect one might have changed its story.
When the Eiffel Tower was built for the 1889 World's Fair, it was meant to be temporary, with plans to tear it down afterward. Many Parisians hated it, calling it an eyesore. But Gustave Eiffel argued for its usefulness as a radio tower, and it was saved. Now it's one of the world's most famous landmarks.
59. What if the Eiffel Tower had been torn down after the 1889 World's Fair, as originally planned? Paris would lack its most iconic landmark. How would its skyline and global identity be perceived today? Would another structure have risen to take its place in the popular imagination? Or would Paris be a city forever missing that unmistakable iron silhouette?
Gladiators weren't always slaves. Sure, many gladiators were prisoners, but some were free men who willingly signed up for fame and fortune. Successful gladiators became celebrities, had groupies, and made serious cash. They were the superstar athletes of ancient Rome, except with way more risk of fatal workplace injuries.
60. What if all gladiators had been enslaved, without the option for free men to join for glory and wealth? Would the gladiator games have been viewed purely as a brutal punishment, lacking the element of voluntary heroism or celebrity? Perhaps the games would have lost some of their popular appeal, seen as less of a spectacle and more of a grim necessity, if there were no superstar athletes to cheer for.
Ancient Greek athletes competed totally nude. It was a tribute to the gods and a celebration of the human body. No Adidas, no Nikes, just bare skin and a lot of olive oil. Today's gym gear has nothing on the full commitment style of ancient Greeks.
61. What if ancient Greek athletes had always competed in full attire, never embracing nudity as a form of tribute or athletic expression? Would their athletic culture have been less distinctive, less intertwined with philosophical ideals of the human form? It's a small cultural detail, but one that profoundly shaped the identity of the ancient Olympic Games.
During the 1692 Salem witch trials, paranoia ran so deep that a dog was accused of witchcraft. Both Salem and Andover saw dogs killed because they were believed to be possessed by demons or witches. Some animals, like dogs, were thought to be vessels for witches' souls, causing strange behavior. Harming these animals was believed to hurt the witch controlling them, leading to cruelty. One of the most shocking cases involved a dog that was said to carry the spirit of a man who refused to arrest witches. The poor pup was executed for allegedly cursing livestock. When even man's best friend wasn't safe, hysteria had completely taken over.
62. What if dogs, seen as man's best friend, had been explicitly exempt from witchcraft accusations during the Salem trials, perhaps due to a prevailing belief in their inherent loyalty or purity? Would it have been a small island of sanity in a sea of hysteria, or would it have just shifted the paranoia onto other animals? This what if highlights the terrifying irrationality of the witch trials, where even beloved pets became victims.
The U.S. Ghost Army was a top-secret unit of artists, actors, and engineers who faked entire armies with inflatable tanks, fake radio chatter, and sound effects. They fooled the Nazis into thinking real divisions were moving in. It was warfare by Hollywood special effects.
63. What if the US Ghost Army had never existed, or if its deceptive tactics had been ineffective? Would the Allied D-Day invasion and subsequent offensives in Europe have been significantly harder, with fewer diversions to draw away enemy forces? This creative what-if reminds us how ingenuity and illusion can be as powerful as brute force in warfare.
Ancient Egyptians mummified animals. Egyptians loved their pets and sacred animals so much that they mummified them too. Cats, birds, even crocodiles were wrapped and preserved, often as offerings to the gods. Sometimes animal mummies were sold as souvenirs to pilgrims visiting temples.
64. What if ancient Egyptians had not mummified animals? We would lose a significant source of archaeological insight into their religious beliefs, daily lives, and reverence for the animal kingdom. The sheer volume and variety of animal mummies provide invaluable data for historians. Without them, our understanding of ancient Egyptian culture would be far less rich.
Medieval doctors used leeches for treating illnesses. Bloodletting was supposed to balance the body's humors. In reality, it often weakened patients more than it healed them. It took centuries to realize that more blood loss wasn't exactly a cure-all.
65. What if medieval doctors had somehow stumbled upon even basic principles of germ theory or antiseptics? Imagine a medieval world where illnesses were treated with genuine efficacy, drastically reducing mortality rates and extending lifespans. The Black Death might have been less devastating, and the course of scientific and medical advancement could have been accelerated by centuries, profoundly altering human history.
Hey, curious minds. Quick pause. Which of these facts would you not want to be true in your timeline? Let us know in the comments. Or better yet, what's your favorite what-if moment in history? Now back to the madness.
66. What if Vikings hated to ski? Skiing wasn't just a sport for Vikings. It was transportation. Norse myths even included gods of skiing like Skadi and Uller. When they weren't raiding villages, they were gliding across frozen landscapes. What if Vikings had hated skiing, or if their environment had been less conducive to it? Would their ability to traverse snowy landscapes have been severely hampered, affecting their movements, trade, and even their military campaigns in winter? This what-if highlights how deeply intertwined culture, geography, and practical skills can be. 67. What if Roman roads didn't last? Ancient Roman roads still exist. Roman roads still exist. Roman roads were so well built that many are still in use today. Their secret? Layers of stone, sand, and crushed rock topped with tight-fitting paving stones. Their roads didn't just connect an empire. They literally stood the test of time. What if Roman roads had been poorly constructed and rapidly disintegrated? Would the vast Roman Empire have been much harder to administer and defend, perhaps collapsing earlier due to logistical failures? The enduring quality of their infrastructure was a cornerstone of their power. Without it, the eternal city might have faded much faster. 68. What if ancient Greek theater had no masks? Ancient Greek actors wore oversized masks with exaggerated expressions to amplify emotions and project their voices in massive open-air theaters. Without microphones, the giant mouth holes and dramatic faces made sure even folks in the nosebleeds got the show. What if ancient Greek theater had not used masks, relying instead on facial expressions and natural voices in their vast amphitheaters? Would the theatrical experience have been less impactful for large audiences, perhaps leading to smaller, more intimate performances? The iconic masks were crucial to their unique dramatic style. The fearsome pirate Blackbeard was known as Edward Teach, or maybe Thatch. Historians still debate his real last name. He carefully cultivated a terrifying image, weaving slow-burning fuses into his beard to look like he was emerging from hell itself. 69. What if Blackbeard's real name had been widely known and unremarkable, and he hadn't cultivated such a terrifying, mysterious persona? Would he have been less feared, less legendary? The ambiguity surrounding his true identity, combined with his theatrical fright tactics, amplified his power. A less mysterious Blackbeard might have been a less effective one. Egyptians crafted prosthetic toes and fingers from wood, leather, and even metal. These weren't just cosmetic either. They were functional. Some prosthetic toes show enough wear that historians believe they were used for walking, not just burial rites. 70. What if ancient Egyptians had not developed such advanced prosthetics? Would life for individuals with amputations have been significantly harder, with less mobility and participation in society? This what-if highlights their remarkable medical ingenuity, which improved the quality of life for many, even thousands of years ago. Medieval siege warfare was brutal. Sieges were the ultimate war of attrition. Attackers didn't just batter walls with catapults. They hurled dead animals and human corpses over the walls to spread disease. Starvation, sickness, psychological terror were standard siege tactics. 71. What if medieval siege warfare had been conducted purely through direct combat, without the use of biological warfare, like hurling diseased corpses, or psychological terror? Would sieges have been much longer, or more often unsuccessful? The brutality of these tactics, while horrific, often broke the will of defenders. A more humane siege might have entirely changed military outcomes. Ancient libraries were treasures. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just famous, it was legendary, housing hundreds of thousands of scrolls that attracted the greatest minds of the ancient world. Its destruction remains one of history's greatest cultural tragedies. 72. What if the Library of Alexandria and other great ancient libraries had been completely destroyed much earlier, or more thoroughly, losing even more knowledge? Our understanding of ancient science, philosophy, and literature would be dramatically impoverished. It's a sobering thought to consider how much knowledge was lost, and how much more could have vanished without a trace. Viking sailors used the sun, stars, and even birds to chart their way across the Atlantic. But on cloudy days, they used sunstones, special crystals that detected polarized light. Helping them find the hidden sun. 73. What if Viking sailors had not discovered or utilized sunstones for navigation on cloudy days? Would their daring transatlantic voyages have been much riskier, or even impossible? Perhaps their explorations and settlements in North America would have been significantly curtailed, altering the course of early European contact with the New World. In medieval Europe, guilds regulated who could work in a trade, what prices they charged, and how products were made. They protected quality to trained apprentices, and kept trade secrets locked tighter than any modern copyright lawyer could dream of. 74. What if medieval guilds had never formed, leading to a more unregulated and chaotic economic landscape? Would the quality of goods have been more inconsistent, and the training of craftsmen less formalized? Perhaps the development of specialized trades and standardized production would have been much slower, impacting the overall economic development of Europe. In 105 AD, Kai Lun introduced paper to China using mulberry bark and hemp fibers. Before that, people wrote on bamboo, silk, or animal hides. Paper made record-keeping cheaper, faster, and more widespread, sparking a communication revolution that changed the world forever. 75. What if the ancient Chinese had not invented paper? Imagine a world where writing was still largely confined to expensive silk, cumbersome bamboo, or heavy clay tablets for millennia. With the spread of knowledge, literacy, and bureaucratic administration have been severely hampered, slowing the pace of technological and social development across vast empires. It's hard to overstate the impact of paper. The Maya weren't just great builders. They were master astronomers. Their calendars could predict solar eclipses and track the movements of Venus with stunning precision. The end of the world myth? It was just a modern misinterpretation of a calendar cycle reset, not a doomsday prophecy. 76. What if the Mayan calendars had been wildly inaccurate, constantly mispredicting astronomical events and seasons? Would their civilization have been less reliant on celestial observations? Perhaps developing different forms of scientific inquiry or religious practice. The precision of their calendars is a hallmark of their intellectual sophistication. Castles were not just about defense. They were bustling centers of medieval life, housing noble families, servants, soldiers, and craftsmen. Beyond the battlements, castles hosted feasts, courts, and even elaborate dances. They were fortresses and lively homes rolled into one. 77. What if medieval castles had been built purely as military fortresses, devoid of any domestic or social function? Would medieval society have been far less centralized, with noble families living in less protected manor houses, and only retreating to bare-bones fortifications during wartime? The castle as a bustling, vibrant hub of life would be lost. In West Africa, salt was so vital that it was traded ounce for ounce with gold. Salt preserved food, maintained health, and enabled survival in the brutal heat. In cities like Timbuktu, fortunes were built not on precious metals alone, but on simple white crystals. 78. What if salt had been abundant in West Africa, or if its preservative qualities were not so crucial? Would the vast wealth of the Mali Empire in cities like Timbuktu have been much less prominent without the lucrative gold for salt trade driving their economies? It highlights how seemingly simple commodities can shape the destiny of empires.
Hey, curious minds, quick pause. Which of these facts would you not want to be true in your timeline? Let us know in the comments. Or better yet, what's your favorite what-if moment in history? Now back to the madness. 79. What if medieval universities started huge? The first European universities in places like Bologna and Paris were informal gatherings of students and scholars. No sprawling campuses, just rented halls and a passion for learning. Over the centuries, these humble beginnings evolved into today's sprawling educational empires. What if medieval universities had started as massive, state-funded institutions with sprawling campuses from day one? Would they have been less organic, less driven by the independent passion of scholars and students? Perhaps their growth would have been more controlled, less dynamic, if they hadn't begun from such humble, grassroots origins. 80. What if Japan remained a republic? In 1868, samurai loyal to the old shogunate briefly declared part of Hokkaido an independent country. They called it the Republic of Ezo. They even elected a president, Enomoto Takeyaki. But after just a few months, imperial forces crushed the rebellion. It remains Japan's only experiment with democracy before the Meiji Emperor's rule. What if the Republic of Ezo had not been crushed, and had managed to establish itself as a lasting, independent, democratic state in Japan? How would this have impacted the Meiji Restoration and the subsequent modernization of Japan? Would it have led to a civil war or a dual political system fundamentally altering Japan's path into the modern era? At its height under Darius the Great, the Persian Empire stretched from Egypt to India. It was a model of efficiency featuring postal systems, standardized currency, and religious tolerance. The Persians mastered the art of running a multicultural empire long before Rome. 81. What if the Persian Empire had remained a smaller, less influential regional power? How would the ancient world's political landscape have differed without its vast, tolerant rule? A fully suited knight lugged around 45 to 55 pounds of armor. It still made moving fast tricky. Knights trained rigorously to fight while encased in steel. 82. What if medieval knights had worn much lighter, less protective armor? Would medieval battles have been faster, more fluid, but significantly deadlier? Samurai were bound by Bushido, the strict way of the warrior. This demanded absolute loyalty, personal honor, and total fearlessness in battle. Failure was so shameful that many samurai committed seppuku, ritual suicide. 83. What if the samurai had rejected Bushido, or if its tenets were far less strict? If you got sick in medieval Europe, you were in trouble. Treatments involved bleeding, purging, and prayers rather than science. Diseases were blamed on imbalanced humors, bad air, or angry gods. 84. What if medieval medicine had been surprisingly effective through ancient knowledge? Would European populations have grown faster, leading to different social pressures? Aboriginal Australians have maintained continuous culture for over 50,000 years. Their stories, songs, and art pass knowledge across generations without written language. 85. What if Aboriginal culture was not ancient, but relatively young like other cultures? Venetian merchant Marco Polo journeyed along the Silk Road to China. His accounts of riches and wonders amazed Europe, even if some thought he was spinning tales. 86. What if Marco Polo's accounts had been widely disbelieved or dismissed as fantasy? The Incas connected their massive Andean empire with over 25,000 miles of roads. They carved trails through mountains, across deserts, and over rivers, all without the wheel or iron tools. Their roadwork rivals anything modern engineering has pulled off. 87. What if the Inca road system had been poorly built, prone to collapse, or difficult to traverse? Would their vast empire, reliant on rapid communication and troop movement, have been far less cohesive and harder to control? The quality of their infrastructure was key to their imperial success. Gothic cathedrals like Notre Dame soared skyward with pointed arches, flying buttresses, and huge stained-glass windows. They weren't just churches. They were engineering marvels designed to awe the masses and bring worshippers spiritually closer to heaven. 88. What if Gothic cathedrals had remained small, humble structures, not pushing the boundaries of architectural possibility? Would the medieval period have lacked these awe-inspiring feats of engineering and artistry? The ambition and scale of Gothic architecture reflected a profound spiritual and technological drive. Norse mythology is a wild saga of gods like Odin, Thor, and Loki battling giants, forging worlds, and facing the apocalypse of Ragnarok. These epic tales shaped Viking culture and continue to inspire pop culture, from Marvel movies to heavy metal lyrics. 89. What if Norse mythology had been a bland, uninspiring collection of tales lacking the drama and vibrant characters we know today? Would Viking culture have been less rich, less distinct? And certainly modern pop culture would be missing a massive source of inspiration for everything from superheroes to fantasy epics.
Hey, curious minds, quick pause. Which of these facts would you not want to be true in your timeline? Let us know in the comments. Or better yet, what's your favorite what-if moment in history? Now back to the madness.
90. What if medieval music was monotonous? From sacred Gregorian chants echoing through stone cathedrals to bawdy drinking songs in smoky taverns, medieval music spanned the sacred and the profane. It wove through daily life, marking births, deaths, harvests, and holy days with rhythm and melody. What if medieval music had been entirely monotonous, consisting only of simple, repetitive chants without any of the diverse melodies and forms that actually existed? Would medieval life have been less vibrant, less expressive? Music played a crucial role in both spiritual and social life, and its variety reflected the richness of the era. 91. What if Angkor was a minor kingdom? The Khmer Empire, centered at Angkor, dominated Southeast Asia for centuries. Its crowning jewel, Angkor Wat, remains the largest religious monument on Earth. Intricate carvings, sprawling temples, and complex city planning made Angkor a marvel of ancient urban design. What if Angkor had been a minor, short-lived kingdom instead of a dominant empire? Southeast Asia's history and architectural legacy would be vastly different. The incredible scale and artistry of Angkor Wat would never have been realized, and a major chapter of ancient Asian civilization would be lost. 92. What if Mali was poor? Mali was rich in gold. The Mali Empire controlled vast gold mines, and its ruler, Mansa Musa, was so wealthy that his 14th century pilgrimage to Mecca caused inflation in the cities he visited. Today he is often called the richest person in history, richer than any modern billionaire. What if the Mali Empire had been poor without its vast gold resources? Would West African history have been less influential? And would cities like Timbuktu have been mere trading posts rather than centers of immense wealth and learning? Mansa Musa's legendary pilgrimage, which showcased the incredible riches of Africa, would never have occurred. 93. What if Polynesians navigated poorly? Polynesian sailors mastered the Pacific Ocean, covering thousands of miles using stars, wave patterns, and bird migrations. Their outrigger canoes carried them to islands like Hawaii, Tahiti, and New Zealand without compasses or maps. What if Polynesian sailors had been poor navigators, unable to successfully traverse the vast Pacific? Would the islands of Oceania have remained largely uninhabited for much longer, and would human migration patterns across the globe have been vastly different? Their incredible feats of navigation are a testament to human ingenuity and courage. 94. What if ancient Egypt had no female pharaoh? Hatshepsut ruled Egypt for more than 20 years in the 15th century BC. She expanded trade, built grand temples, and even wore a false beard to legitimize her rule. Her reign was so successful that later rulers tried to erase her from history out of pure envy. What if Hatshepsut had not risen to become a female pharaoh, or if her reign had been unsuccessful and quickly forgotten? Would the example of a powerful female ruler in ancient Egypt have been lost, and perhaps the very idea of queens wielding such authority would have been even rarer in subsequent history? Her story stands as a powerful testament to female leadership in antiquity. 95. What if the Silk Road didn't connect east and west? The Silk Road was less a single path and more a web of trade routes linking China, Persia, India, and Europe. Along it flowed not just silk and spices, but ideas, religions, technologies, and diseases, shaping the course of world history. What if the Silk Road, or any similar extensive trade network, had never fully connected the East and West? Would the exchange of goods, technologies, religions, and ideas have been severely limited, leading to more isolated and distinct cultural developments in each region? Global history would have unfolded in a far less interconnected and diverse manner. 96. What if ancient Greece had no democracy? In Athens, citizens gathered to vote directly on laws, a radical idea that changed political history. Their early experiments with democracy laid the groundwork for modern governments, even if voting rights were limited to free landowning men. What if ancient Greece had never experimented with democracy, remaining purely aristocratic or tyrannical? Would the very concept of popular rule have emerged much later in history, or in a different form? Western political thought would be profoundly different without the Athenian experiment as its foundational example. And 97. What if the Aztecs had no floating gardens? In the swampy valley where Tenochtitlan rose, the Aztecs built chinampas, artificial islands woven from reeds and mud. These floating gardens produced massive amounts of food and helped feed one of the world's largest cities at the time. What if the Aztecs had not developed chinampas, their ingenious floating gardens? Would the vast city of Tenochtitlan have been unable to sustain its large population in a swampy environment, perhaps limiting its growth or forcing a different location? Their agricultural innovation was crucial to their urban development. 98. What if the Black Death was less deadly? The Black Death swept through Europe in the 14th century, killing up to 60% of the population. It reshaped society, collapsed economies, and changed the course of history. For survivors, the world that emerged was almost unrecognizable. What if the Black Death had been far less deadly, perhaps killing only 10 to 20% of the population? Would the social, economic, and political upheavals that followed have been less profound? The massive demographic shift caused by the plague fundamentally altered labor relations, social mobility, and even religious thought. A less severe plague might have led to a much slower, less dramatic transition out of the medieval era. 99. What if Cleopatra was fully Egyptian? Despite being the last pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra VII was actually of Greek descent. Her family, the Ptolemies, ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great's death, and they never fully embraced Egyptian culture. Cleopatra herself was the first of her dynasty to learn the Egyptian language and presented herself as the true queen of Egypt, though her ancestry was Greek. What if Cleopatra VII had been of purely Egyptian descent, deeply rooted in ancient pharaonic traditions rather than Greek? Would her diplomatic skills and political alliances with Rome have played out differently without her Hellenistic background? Her unique position straddling two cultures was a key aspect of her historical significance. 100. What if you could change history? Thank you for watching The Human Curious, where knowledge meets imagination. If you enjoyed exploring the what-ifs of history, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more. We have plenty more incredible alternate realities coming your way. Until next time, stay curious.